What if the moment you stopped chasing was the exact moment they started thinking about you every day? Because when your attention disappears, something unexpected begins to happen inside the other person. The question is not whether they notice. The question is what they will do next. If this message is already making you see past relationship dynamics in a completely different way, take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts below. Have you ever stopped chasing someone and watched their behavior suddenly change? Your experience may help someone else understand what they're going through. Most people believe that attention creates attraction. They assume that the more they pursue, explain, and prove their feelings, the stronger the connection becomes. Yet there is a strange psychological truth hidden beneath many relationships. The moment you stop chasing someone, you interrupt a pattern they may have unconsciously depended upon. What seemed ordinary yesterday suddenly becomes noticeable today. Your constant presence, once taken for granted, is no longer guaranteed. And in that absence, something begins to shift. For a long time, this person may have expected your energy to remain available. They knew you would reach out, start conversations, or keep the connection alive. Whether they valued it openly or not, they became familiar with the certainty of your attention. Human beings naturally adapt to what is consistently available. What arrives every day eventually becomes part of the background. It is no longer examined or appreciated in the same way because the mind assumes it will always remain there. Then something changes. You stop chasing. You stop seeking reassurance. You stop trying to pull the relationship forward through effort alone. From your perspective, it may feel like a simple decision. But from their perspective, the psychological landscape suddenly looks different. The routine they had grown accustomed to has been disrupted. What was once predictable has become uncertain. And uncertainty has a remarkable ability to capture attention. The human mind constantly builds expectations about other people. We create internal pictures of who they are and how they will behave. When someone acts according to those expectations, our attention relaxes. But when they behave in an unexpected way, the mind becomes alert. It begins searching for answers. Why did they change? What happened? What does this mean? These questions create a level of mental engagement that constant availability rarely achieves. The person who once overlooked your presence may now find themselves thinking about your absence. This is why the end of the chase often marks the beginning of a new psychological dynamic. You have stepped out of a role they thought you would always play. You are no longer moving toward them in the same familiar way. And because of that, they are forced to see you differently. Not as a certainty, but as a mystery. Not as someone endlessly available, but as someone capable of walking their own path. The moment the chase ends, you stop being predictable. And in many cases, that is the moment they truly begin to notice you. One of the most powerful forces in human psychology is the need for validation. Few people openly admit how much they depend on it, yet it quietly shapes countless interactions. Validation is more than praise or compliments. It is the feeling of being seen, desired, valued, and emotionally significant in the eyes of another person. When someone consistently receives your attention, your concern, and your effort, they may not consciously recognize its importance. Over time, it simply becomes part of their emotional environment. This is why people often fail to appreciate what is constantly available to them. The mind adapts quickly to familiar sources of comfort. Just as a person living beside a flowing river eventually stops noticing the sound of the water, someone receiving regular attention may stop recognizing its value. What was once appreciated becomes expected. The emotional energy you provide, gradually transforms from a gift into something assumed. Not because they are intentionally ungrateful, but because familiarity has a way of making even valuable things appear ordinary. Then something unexpected happens. You stop chasing. The messages become less frequent. The effort disappears. The emotional investment that once flowed freely is no longer there. Suddenly, the source of validation they unconsciously relied upon begins to fade. At first, they may not fully understand why they feel unsettled. They simply notice an absence where there was once certainty. The silence creates a gap, and the human mind instinctively seeks to fill gaps with questions. What makes this experience so powerful is that uncertainty awakens the imagination. When your attention is always present, there is little reason for someone to wonder about you. But when it disappears, possibilities begin to emerge. They may start asking themselves whether you have moved on, whether someone else has captured your attention, or whether you have discovered a new sense of self-worth. These thoughts often occupy more mental space than your constant pursuit ever did. The absence of validation becomes impossible to ignore. This is the hidden panic that sometimes appears when a person realizes your attention is no longer guaranteed. It is not always love that they suddenly feel. It is often the shock of losing something they never expected to lose. For the first time, they are forced to confront the value of what was once freely available. And in that moment, they begin to see your attention not as a permanent resource, but as something meaningful, something limited, and something they may no longer control. The moment you stop chasing someone, a subtle but profound shift begins to take place. It is not always visible on the surface, yet it changes the entire emotional structure of the relationship. For a long time, the dynamic may have revolved around your efforts. You were the one initiating conversations, seeking connection, offering reassurance, or trying to move things forward. Whether the other person realized it or not, they became accustomed to occupying a position where your attention flowed toward them. The relationship developed a certain balance, and that balance felt normal. When you stop chasing, that familiar arrangement suddenly changes. The energy that once moved consistently in one direction no longer does. The person who was used to receiving now finds themselves in an unfamiliar situation. The emotional current has weakened, and with it comes a sense of uncertainty. Human beings are highly sensitive to changes in patterns. Even when someone appears unaffected, the mind notices when a source of attention, validation, or emotional investment is no longer behaving as expected. What makes this shift so powerful is that it forces the other person to become aware of their own role in the connection. As long as you were carrying the weight of the pursuit, they had little reason to examine their level of investment. Your efforts kept the relationship moving, but once those efforts disappear, they can no longer rely on your energy to maintain the connection. They are faced with a choice they may have avoided before: either contribute to the relationship or allow the distance to grow. In many cases, this is the first time they truly confront what the relationship means to them. There is another psychological factor at work as well. People often value what they must actively engage with more than what is freely available. When your attention was constant, it could be taken for granted. But when your presence becomes less predictable, it gains psychological weight. The other person may begin noticing your absence in situations where they once overlooked your presence. They may think about conversations that never happened, messages that never arrived, or opportunities that quietly slipped away. The dynamic has shifted from certainty to possibility. and possibility naturally commands attention. This is why stopping the chase often transforms the relationship in unexpected ways. You are no longer operating from a position of pursuit. Instead, you are standing in your own space, allowing the connection to reveal its true nature. The focus moves away from convincing someone of your value and toward observing their response. Some people will remain passive, revealing that the connection existed largely because of your effort. Others will begin moving toward you, demonstrating a level of interest that was hidden beneath the old dynamic. Either way, the shift brings clarity. And clarity is often the first step toward understanding what is real. One of the deepest fears hidden within human nature is the fear of losing control. Most people do not think of themselves as controlling, yet they find comfort in knowing what to expect from the people around them. Predictability creates a sense of security. When someone's behavior follows a familiar pattern, the mind relaxes because it believes it understands the situation. But the moment that pattern changes, uncertainty enters the picture, and uncertainty often creates discomfort. When you were chasing this person, your actions may have been easy for them to predict. They knew you would reach out after periods of silence. They knew you would try to resolve conflicts, restart conversations, or maintain the connection. Even if they never consciously acknowledged it, they had developed expectations about your behavior. In a subtle way, they felt they understood their place in the relationship. They knew how the story usually unfolded because they had seen the same pattern repeat itself many times before. Then something unexpected happens. You stop. You no longer respond in the ways they anticipated. The messages they expected do not arrive. The emotional reactions they once counted on are absent. Suddenly, they can no longer predict your next move. This loss of certainty creates a psychological tension that is difficult to ignore. The mind immediately begins searching for explanations because it dislikes situations it cannot control or fully understand. For some people, this tension becomes powerful enough to motivate action. They may reach out unexpectedly, become more attentive, or find reasons to reappear in your life. What often surprises them is that they are not simply reacting to your absence. They are reacting to the loss of influence they once believed they had. The familiar dynamic that allowed them to anticipate your behavior has disappeared. Without realizing it, they are now trying to determine whether they still occupy the same place in your world that they once did. This is why stopping the chase can reveal truths that endless pursuit never could. When a person can no longer rely on your predictable responses, their real level of interest begins to emerge. Some will make genuine efforts to reconnect because they value the relationship. Others will attempt small tests to see whether they still have access to your attention. Either way, their reaction often stems from the same source: the realization that they can no longer assume control over the dynamic. And when someone discovers that your life continues without their influence, they are forced to confront a reality they may have never expected, that your value was never dependent on chasing them in the first place. Distance has a strange way of revealing what constant closeness often conceals. When two people are caught in a familiar pattern, they rarely stop to examine their deeper feelings. Daily interactions, routine conversations, and predictable behaviors can create the illusion that everything is understood. Yet beneath the surface, many emotions remain hidden, not because they do not exist, but because there has never been a reason to confront them. Sometimes, it is only when someone steps back that the truth begins to emerge. When you stop chasing, you create space. At first, that space may seem like emptiness, but psychologically, it becomes a mirror. Without your constant presence filling every gap, the other person is left alone with their own thoughts. They no longer have the comfort of knowing you will always reach out first or keep the connection alive. In that silence, emotions that were previously ignored can begin to rise to the surface. Feelings that were buried beneath habit and routine suddenly become impossible to overlook.
The human mind often recognizes value most clearly through absence. When something is always available, it blends into the background of life. But when it disappears, its importance becomes easier to measure. The other person may start remembering conversations they once dismissed, moments they failed to appreciate, or qualities they took for granted. Memories begin to return with a new significance because they are now viewed through the lens of loss rather than certainty. What once seemed ordinary can suddenly appear meaningful. This process can awaken emotions that neither person fully understood before. Affection may become clearer. Appreciation may deepen. Curiosity may grow stronger. Even unresolved feelings can resurface. The key point is that distance forces reflection. Without the distraction of constant interaction, the mind naturally turns inward. It begins connecting pieces that were previously scattered. In many cases, the person starts to realize that your role in their life carried more emotional weight than they initially believed. This is why the return of hidden emotions often follows the end of the chase. Not because distance magically creates feelings, but because it exposes what was already there beneath the surface. The silence removes distractions and allows deeper truths to emerge. Some people discover genuine affection they never fully acknowledged. Others realize they miss the comfort, understanding, or emotional connection they once assumed would always be available. Whatever the outcome, one thing becomes clear. When you stop chasing, you give reality a chance to speak. And reality often reveals emotions that constant pursuit kept hidden from view. After a person notices your absence, experiences uncertainty, and begins confronting emotions they once ignored, a new stage often begins. This is the stage most people misunderstand. Instead of openly expressing what they feel, many individuals first look for evidence. They want to know whether their place in your life remains unchanged. Before revealing vulnerability, they often seek reassurance that they still matter. This is why what happens next is rarely a direct confession. More often, it is a test. These tests are usually subtle rather than obvious. A person may suddenly like an old post, send a casual message, react to something you shared, or find a seemingly innocent reason to contact you. On the surface, these actions may appear insignificant, yet psychologically, they often serve a deeper purpose. The individual is not only reaching out, they are observing. They are watching your response, measuring your level of interest, and trying to determine whether they still have access to the attention they once received so easily. What makes these tests so powerful is that they reveal hidden intentions. When someone genuinely values a connection, they often become curious about whether the bond still exists. They want to know if the emotional door remains open. At the same time, they may fear rejection or uncertainty themselves. Rather than asking direct questions, they create small opportunities for interaction. These moments allow them to gather information without exposing their deeper feelings too quickly. In many cases, the test is less about you and more about managing their own fears. This is where many people unknowingly return to the old dynamic. The moment contact reappears, they rush back into chasing, explaining, pursuing, and proving themselves once again. By doing so, they remove the mystery that had created clarity in the first place. The other person no longer has to wonder, reflect, reflect or reveal their level of investment. The familiar pattern instantly returns. As a result, the deeper truth behind the test is never fully uncovered, because the relationship slips back into its previous structure.
The wiser approach is to observe rather than react impulsively. Allow actions to speak louder than assumptions. If someone truly values your presence, their effort will gradually become clear through consistency rather than isolated gestures. The test that comes next is not only about whether they still care. It is also about whether you have learned to recognize your own worth. When you stop chasing, life presents an opportunity to see people as they truly are. And when their tests begin, the real question is no longer whether they will come back. The real question is whether their actions demonstrate the depth of connection they claim to feel.